right, guys, we are back here again, straight out of the support group, now into another podcast. Our next guest is somebody who reached out to me and has their story and doing a lot of good in their lives and for other people. And so I always like to help anybody, promote their platforms and just what they're doing to help our communities, because the truth of the matter is there's a lot of evil out here, and a lot of the good does not get seen as much, and it should. So anyway, would you like to tell us your name, buddy? A little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Bruce Chalmer. I'm a psychologist. I'm located in Vermont, and for many, many years I specialized in working with couples. And I've written a few books on the subject, and my most recent one is on the general topic of betrayal. And so I've been talking with folks about that because I've seen so many people in my practice where, in the couples therapy practice, where they're coming in with one or both parties feeling betrayed, and it can be really hard to recover from that. And I've learned a lot from the folks I've worked with. So thanks for having me on and giving me a platform to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've all gone through a little bit of betrayal in our lives when it comes to relationships, whether it's cheating, lying, so on and so on. My mom and dad are not together anymore. And my mom and my sister's dad aren't together anymore. And, I'm not with the people that I'm still single. So I think it's a good conversation because unfortunately, marriage nowadays, it doesn't seem as sacred because so many, unfortunately, just break up. But I also think a lot of people get together for the wrong reasons nowadays too.
Yeah, I think that is certainly part of it. I mean, it's, part of it. I think betrayals have happened in marriages for a long, long time.
Sure.
Back in the 70s, the divorce laws changed in this country. And so that made it a lot of, there was a big pent up demand. It's actually the divorce rate's gone down a little bit in the past, 10, 15 years from where it peaked. So it's below 50% now, not much, but it is somewhat below 50% for first marriages.
Yeah. Has it changed at all when they legalized gay marriage?
I don't think so. I haven't looked carefully to see. So I really don't know. It's, my impression is it wouldn't be that much different between gay marriages and straight marriages, but I don't know. I haven't seen the data on it.
Yeah, I was just curious. I didn't know if it made much of a difference or not.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we spend so much time trying to see what our differences are, but there's a lot of similarities, and people are people regardless of who they sleep with. So
very true.
So I think I didn't think it really would make much of a difference. If anything, maybe raise it a little bit, but yeah, they get divorced and they break up all the time too, so it's nothing new.
Yeah, it's interesting in talking with gay folks about that very issue. The people who wanted to get married, because I've learned a lot, especially from gay men, more than from lesbians. I've learned a lot from both. But what gay men have taught is the assumptions of a gay male relationship tend to be somewhat different from the assumptions of straight relationships. And so the people who choose to get married are going to look, I think, somewhat more similar to straight relationships than many other gay relationships. Do you know what I mean? So there may be gays who make some different assumptions about what constitutes fidelity. Sure. And they're not necessarily going to choose to get married in the sort of, the traditional heterosexual style.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what made you kind of get into this field?
Well, I'll answer that in general and then more specifically about, the books I've written. But I got into doing couples work just because I found it so compelling. It was so, first of all, I had been through stuff in my own life.
Sure.
As anybody who's old enough has probably been through some stuff in their own life. I went through a divorce when I was in my early 50s. The short story of my first marriage that I always like to tell folks is that both my ex and I went on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. So that kind of explains what happened there. And we all get along. It's great, but it works a lot better that way.
Sure.
So I have been through divorce, and it's a painful thing, even though we had a good reason for it, and it didn't involve anybody being bad, but it still was painful. And I was working with a lot of couples, and I kept finding it's so inspiring when people would deal with such painful stuff, and often they would deal with it with such courage and heart, even if they couldn't figure out what to do. And I just found it really a privilege to be included in that. And I came up with some ways that I think have been helpful to people. And so it's been very rewarding work. So that's why I've been sort of focusing on couples work. And then more recently, I started, actually quite a while ago now, it was probably about 15 years ago, I started doing videos and talking about particular topics that kept coming up in my couples work that I just thought would be helpful for folks. And that I ended up writing a few books on the topic. The podcast I do with my wife actually is called Couples Therapy in 7 Words, and I'll tell you what the 7 words are, because I came up with this pretty early in my practice. I was at I remember the origin story of this. I was at a consultation group meeting, how colleagues get together and just talk about our work so we can bounce it off some folks. And we were leaving, the meeting was just breaking up and we were leaving, and a colleague of mine turned to me and said, "How do you do couples therapy anyway?" Which is kind of a silly question to ask on the way out of literally walking out the door. But, I had thought about it a little bit, and I said, well, if you really boil it all down, I suppose what I'm telling people is be kind and don't panic. Because and the reason for that order is that, well, be kind in the sense of kinship. When people feel that they're still kin, they want to stay together. And you can't do that if you're in a panic. If you're panicking about, who is this person? I thought I knew you, that kind of thing. So that's, if you put that together, that's 5 words, be kind and don't panic. And then I started telling that to folks. They would say, I've been thinking, if you boil it all down, that's kind of what this is about. And people would say, yeah, that really sounds good. How do you not panic? And I realized they kind of had me there. And I said, well, I don't know the simple answer for how you not panic, but I do have an observation that the people I worked with who were able to deal with the anxiety of having serious problems in an important relationship and not freak out. They felt anxiety, but they could not freak out, were the ones who had a particular kind of mindset that, this sucks, it's really hard, but, somehow reality's right to be what it is, even when it seems difficult to understand. And I just summarized that whole mindset in one word, which is faith. And of course, I use the word faith. It sounds like I mean religious faith, and I don't necessarily mean religious faith. Right. I just mean that mindset that says, rather than fight with reality, we're going to have to work with it. And it's not merely just sort of accepting it, grudgingly. It's like, there's got to be something right about it, even if it sucks.
Sure.
It's based on something right. So yeah. Anyway, that's where that came from.
No, I gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I kind of know what you mean, because it's like, whether it's faith in God or just faith in yourself, sometimes it just comes down to just being patient and believing that it can happen. And a lot of times we flinch. And like I always say, I would be 100% right if I listened to my intuition, but I don't always. And there's a lot of times where it's just like, I know I should, like right now, like I just got laid off my other job and I'm fine. I'm financially okay and everything's good, but I know, like, there's a part of me that's like, I need to get back to work. I need to do something. But I keep having this overwhelming feeling of just be patient, stay still, and it'll all work itself out. So that's why I keep doing that. And now I'm learning from the last time this happened. And just have faith. And like I said, it can be in God, but also definitely have faith in yourself. Because if you don't believe you can accomplish or do anything, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, somehow this whole life business has got to be livable. It's like we've made it as a species. We've made it. It's got to be mostly livable. It's generally good. It's interesting because I know you're actually part of the disability community. Mm-hmm. I have learned a lot from folks dealing with various disabilities, a lot about that sense of faith, because and you can speak to this from your own experience, of course.
Sure.
Plenty of people have told me, sometime, like if something happens that it results in a disability, they didn't have a disability and then something happens that results in it. And it often takes a while to get there, but I have had many people expressing a sense of gratitude. It's not like anybody's ever said, "Oh, gee, I'm so glad I got into that car crash that, left me unable to walk or something."
Sure.
But I've had plenty of people say, I'm glad I've learned so much from this experience. I'm glad I am who I am, so I wouldn't want to change anything.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's what I mean by faith. That's a sense of faith.
yeah, for sure. No, I mean, mental health, I mean, that keeps me on my toes. But as far as my visual disability, it obviously there's the alternative of being totally blind, which I have friends who are. But then there's just, you know, for a while you spend a lot of time, thinking, why am I cursed? Why did this happen to me? But then eventually you realize, like, once you're able to tap into it and you can use it for your best ability, and you stop saying, why is life unfair? Because life is unfair for everybody. It's just different. Obviously it's, for some people it's more unfair, of course. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, I learned to kind of tap into, as they say, our superpower, because I can get around without really using the little vision I have, because I'm very in tune with my surroundings. And like, if I've ever in a place once, I pretty much know where I'm going, unless they start moving things around and whatever. But I can
Hmm.
go on autopilot and not really use my eyes. I can, like, stare straight and just not really look around and still get around, because I can feel and sense things that are close or near. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so some of that is just having faith in yourself, because you could easily just be like, oh God, I'm going to run into something. Oh God, I may do this, I may do that. But if you can just have faith in yourself that you can, that you're going to be okay, and you're not always panicking. I mean, I talk about mental health all the time, and my demons get the better of me sometimes, but I know by dealing.
That qualifies you. That means you're a human being, I think.
Right, no, for
That's what
sure.
that means.
But I've been
Yeah.
dealing with the eye
Yeah.
thing for 32 years, and it's like, it obviously it gets old real fast.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I'm like, I got this. I've learned how to master it as best I can. Still gonna try to get this one surgery to help better my sight, but nonetheless, if this is what I have, this is what I got, so be it.
Yeah.
I'll live one way or another.
Yeah. And that's so that same kind of faith that we're talking about. When I translate that into the couples dealing with a betrayal, where somebody cheats or somebody lies or somebody, some important person in your life acts in a way that you're saying, I can't imagine that. I never would have thought you'd act that way. That's what betrayal is. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And the people who can get through that, the couples will come to see me where there's been a betrayal, and they still want to see if they can find a way of healing, together or separate, but especially together, I'm thinking. The ones who do that are the ones who can manifest that very same kind of faith. It's like, okay, this happens to a lot of people. It's incredibly painful. We don't know how we're going to get through this, but there must be some way to get through it. It's got to be possible to survive this and deal with it and come out okay. And the ones who go in with that, you can tell the difference sort of early on, because the people, let's say with infidelity, for example, the people who come in and say, we just want to go back to how it was, and the one who did the cheating saying, I'll never do it again. I feel terrible about it.
Sure.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's reasonable. Yeah, they should say that, but they're not willing to look at it. And the people who come in and say, this really sucks, but I know neither one of us is crazy. I know neither one of us is evil. So there must be some meaning here. We better look at it, even if it was wrong. Even if it's like, yes, it was morally wrong for somebody to cheat on someone. Yes, usually all three of us in the room, the couple and me, are all agreeing, well, yeah, it was morally wrong, but we better be able to look at it as meaningful, because you weren't crazy. That's not an explanation. Or rarely, every once in a blue moon, somebody maybe does well, not even rare, quite rare. Somebody's having a manic episode, for example, and they will, they're dealing with an illness. They have a manic episode and they do stuff that is just plain nuts.
Sure.
And they wouldn't do it if they weren't having a manic episode. That's a different sort of thing. But most of the folks I work with, they're not cheating because they're having a manic episode. They're cheating because they're having trouble in their relationship. And it doesn't justify it, but you have to be able to look at that and not flinch. And the couples that can do that are the ones who can come out, either together or separate, but they can come out healed. They can come out feeling like, okay, we learned a lot from that. It sucked. It was painful, but boy, we're better off for having learned what we needed to learn. And I'm really inspired by that. So that's what I wrote about in the book. I have 12 different, I call them couples. I mean, they're not all married couples or partners. Sometimes they're siblings. Sometimes they're, parent and adult child. I think I have one. Yeah, I have one where they're friends who are also business partners. any sort of really important relationship where somebody betrays someone, I write a lot about what is forgiveness and how might you be able to get there, and when should you or shouldn't you even try. And then I write about, separate from forgiveness, how do you trust somebody? Because the way I talk about forgiveness, you can forgive somebody that you don't trust at all. You can forgive somebody you have no intention of restoring a relationship with. But if you want to restore a relationship and if you want to come to trust, you're going to have to find a way to forgive, and that just means getting over the obsession. You're going to have to find a way of understanding it as, I guess we're all doing the best we can. That sort of thing.
How much is of like what you see with these couples comes down to just bad communication?
It's funny. That is, of course, there's bad communication. It so happens that the book I wrote right before this one, the one on betrayal and forgiveness, the book I wrote before that, the title of it, it's a very snarky title. I called it, "It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong." That's a snarky title, and rather arrogant one, I would say.
Sure.
But I chose it because, of course, it's about communication in a sense. So, pretty substantial majority of the couples who come to see me in the first session are saying, we need tools to communicate. Every time we try to talk about something difficult, we get into a fight, we get into a deep freeze. We obviously need tools to communicate. And what I noticed over the years is, in the vast majority of cases, they're actually all expert communicators. The problem is not that they don't know how to communicate. The problem is what they're communicating. They are communicating very accurately how angry they are, how contemptuous they are, how untrusting they are. They're communicating all that stuff really clearly. They don't need better tools to communicate. What they need is to figure out how come they're so angry or contemptuous or untrusting. And when they do that, they're going to communicate fine. Again, there's the occasional exception, but most people don't need fancy, procedures to communicate. What they need is to figure out why are they communicating so much anger? Why are they communicating that they don't respect the other person? If they actually start respecting the other person and they're not pissed off and they actually seem to be, feeling good toward them, the communication will take care of itself.
Yeah. There's also a lot of people who get into relationships who haven't healed from their past relationships or just their life. And then
absolutely
something in them, let's say they had an abusive mother or something, and now they date a woman that's similar to their mother. So now all these repressed feelings are coming out, and they just never really healed. And I had to learn that the hard way myself, where it's like, oh, you know what? Like, I got to stop looking for love and affection and looking for someone to save me when I have to do the saving. Somebody can come in and accentuate my life. They can make me better. They can make me a better person, but they can't heal for me.
That is so true, and it's painful, right? I mean, that's a hard one to realize.
Yeah.
And usually the way you realize it is by going through a lot of pain. That's typically what happens for folks. Yeah, it's old trauma can really kind of wreak havoc on any sort of relationship because, I've often noted this. Earlier in my career, before I was working mostly with couples, I was doing a lot of work helping people recover from trauma. I'm trained in there's a couple of techniques. I don't know if you've heard of EMDR. It's interesting because it's named after eye movements, but people who have visual impairments there's other modalities you can do it in.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And then shortly after they developed it, they realized, you don't have to use the eyes. You can use other modalities as well.
Okay.
But it's a procedure that helps people process trauma, which is to say, it helps them recognize that their memories of the trauma aren't dangerous. The trauma was, but the memories aren't. And then you don't freak out when you're reminded of it. And the problem that what people have when they have PTSD, they call it a disorder. It's really difficult for folks who have it, but PTSD is not a malfunctioning brain. It's what your brain is supposed to do to protect you. It's saying, wow, that reminds me of that horrible time where I almost got killed. I better panic now. And when you can process the trauma so that you realize if you're in a situation that isn't itself actually dangerous, it's just reminding you of something, then you don't have to panic. And then people can get on with their lives. And you can imagine that in relationships, like somebody who's been through sexual trauma, for example, and they're in a loving relationship where they want to have sex, but every time it happens, they panic.
Sure.
That can really wreak havoc on a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know what kind of baggage someone is carrying with them. Like, it's like, oh, they have kids and whatever else, but like there's some of that underlining that you don't know about. I think everybody
You don't
carries
know
that.
until you get to know them. Right. Right.
Yeah. That's why I don't know why
Yeah.
people sorry, I don't know why people get like they move in with each other and they don't even really know each other like they should. Like if you're not fully comfortable with
Yeah.
somebody, it's like why are you moving and getting married? Like get to know them first.
Yeah. That is kind of a classic. It's interesting because if you look at other, either subcultures in our country or other countries entirely, cultures where they practice arranged marriages,
Mhm. Right.
and now I'm going to say this without data, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't, I haven't researched this thoroughly. This is just a gut impression, and I could be wrong. But my gut impression is that the success rate, if you measure success in terms of how satisfied are people with their marriages, the success rate of arranged marriage cultures and the success rate of our culture where we pick our own, and get to know people first are probably pretty similar. I don't think they're that different
Yeah,
because,
maybe.
you start off that idea of, yes, people moving in together before they know each other often turns out to be a really bad idea. Where you have arranged marriages, you typically have families or matchmakers or, people who do know people who are taking an educated guess about people who are apt to be compatible with each other. And they're probably no worse than we do by getting to know each other because, you really can't get to know how it's going to be to live with someone until you actually live with them. You can know somebody for a long time, not living together, and then you start living together and you bump into stuff you never bumped into before.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's different cultures, and you never know. There are people that on both sides are happy and unhappy. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like I said, for me, that would seem like God. I would never want somebody to set me up with somebody this is the person you're gonna be married to for the rest of your life. But if it works for you, then I mean, who am I to say?
Yeah. No, yeah, I grew up in this culture too. I wouldn't like that either. But there's plenty of people where that's how it works. And again, and often it works well, but of course, often there are horror stories. But that's true in our culture as well. People pick each other out and think they're fine, and then it turns out it doesn't work at all.
So
So,
when did you find out that you and your wife were actually like compatible? Like you really knew she was the one?
you mean my current wife?
Current wife, yes,
where it's working well? Yes.
yes.
Yeah, that was so interesting. I can tell you a little bit about our story. So we got together. We both. She was living in a different part. No, that's right. Yeah, she was a slightly different part of Vermont. We both live in Vermont, and my plan. We're both heavily involved in our Jewish community in Vermont, which is not a huge community. Vermont's a small state.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a small state. Yeah.
And the Jewish population of Vermont is way smaller. So we didn't happen to know each other, but we certainly knew people in common. So I was living in Montpelier, which is sort of in the center of the state. It's the state capital, but it's really little. It's just a little town, it's about 8,500. And she was living in the big city of Vermont, and I say that sort of ironically because the big city of Vermont is Burlington, which is only about population 50,000. But Vermont's a very rural state. But she was living there, and she was the education director at one of the synagogues here. And I was in our little community in Montpelier. And after I ended up getting divorced, I was wondering, gee, who's out there? And my plan was I knew there wasn't anybody in the little tiny town I was from there that was available or appropriate. And so my plan was I was going to contact the rabbi at one of the synagogues in Burlington, in the big city, and say, hey, because I knew him, and who you got, who's around that I might meet. I was going to look around for some introductions, and it turned out I just looked online on JDate. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's basically Match.com.
Yeah, I've seen it before. Yeah,
JDate, yeah, and so happened to see her profile there, and her profile was written in a way that I'm probably, the only Jewish man in Vermont that would be appropriate for her profile. Because of exactly how she worded it, you had to be at just the right level of knowledge to know what she was talking about and not be, freaked out by it being too much.
Okay.
So it was amazing. So I wrote to her, and of course, when you do these things online, they don't immediately say what names are or something, but I wrote to her and I gave her my name and I said, gee, the last time I was in Burlington, it happened to be for the performance of a piece of music that I had written, a cantata. I, among other things, I composed music and performed music. So I had written this hour and 20-minute cantata that a group that I was in performed in Burlington a few months before. And she wrote back and she said, oh, I was at that performance and I love the music. And so we knew this was a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
And then after that, it turned out that we actually knew all these people in common, including the rabbi who we ended up officiating at our ceremony. We both independently knew him he was from another part of the state, but we both knew him independently from other times. So
that's cool.
We were kind of meant to be. That's how we think of it.
No, I think it's good to she's kind of part of, I'm sure, why you do what you do. You found love, and you know what love feels like. You know what, betrayal and everything else feels like, and you found someone you love, and not everyone can say that. So.
Yeah, and actually I want to follow up a little more because, sort of based on what your question's about, because, how would we know? So we had all this stuff in common, which is lovely. Mm. And really but I think what we could really tell quickly was how much our values lined up in all the important areas. We are two different people, of course. We are male and female, which already is characteristically very different, and as the French say, "Vive la différence." That's nice. We like that.
Sure.
But we have so much in common with respect to our mutual involvement in our Jewish communities. We're in very similar ways. We knew we wanted to keep doing that. We wanted to live in ways that express that. We were involved in lots of similar kinds of things, and we could just tell we were kindred spirits in that sense. So, often people will get together based on, just one thing that they like. Often people get together because they have this incredible sexual chemistry, which is great. I mean, sexual chemistry is wonderful.
Sure.
But it's not reliable all by itself.
No.
Or they'll get together based on something else and have no sexual chemistry, and that tends not to work out so well either.
Yeah.
So, if you're really fortunate, you find someone that you can not only feel that sort of buzz with, but you can also feel a sense of commonality with. Oh, wow, we seem to be playing for the same team here, which is really nice.
Yeah, that is awesome. Because, I've had sexual chemistry with certain women, and then it's like, it's fine, it's awesome, but then, there's still something that feels wrong, where it's like, this is fun, I enjoy this, but why don't I feel as, upbeat about going on a date with you or going out to eat? Why do I want to hang out with you more? Why do I just want to sleep with you? It's fun.
Yeah,
we have
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and of course, I'm not knocking sex. Sex is great, and it tends to be important in a marriage as well. But I'm also noting, you need more than that to build a life with someone.
Sure.
And that's it's just especially, and there's another factor too, which maybe it's obvious, but not everybody likes the idea of monogamy. And if you do, and I happen to, I'm a fan,
right.
I say to people, I like being married even when my marriage wasn't working. And I like it a lot better now that I'm in one that does work.
Right.
But, that not everybody is into that concept of monogamy. And if you're not, it's awfully difficult to please somebody who is.
Yeah.
And I've met plenty of couples where that seems to be those are the rocky shoals. It's like, wow, somebody, they think they are okay with it, but they're really not.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult.
Well, I think because some of these things get stigmatized and everything's taboo even still to this day, where it's like swinging or whatever. It's like, you like what you like. Mm. There are people who really like these different things. There are people, there's people who don't like, they're asexual. They don't like anybody. They like everybody, but they don't want to be with anybody. And then there's
not sexually, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's so, and now, they kind of gotten all messed up now because there's all these different pronouns and things, but there is a category for everybody. And again, some are harder to find than others, but they're out there.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think there's any shame in having a little kink or liking what you like. I like to be with one person too, but if somebody's like, hey man, I like to be with 6 people. I'm like, what's that like? I'm interested, but it's not my thing, but I'm fascinated by it.
We've had, I think it was a couple of times, we've interviewed folks on our podcast who are sort of experts on polyamory.
Okay.
And it is interesting because, I have no interest in it personally, and nor does my wife.
Sure.
But what's interesting about it is just how much talk about communication. I mean, one of the people we talked to mentioned that, yeah, Google Calendar is an incredible invention that's sort of necessary to keep straight, who you're with when and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's really tricky. And of course, my view from the standpoint of a couples therapist, it's funny. I had a career before I became a psychologist. Actually, when I was while I was getting my PhD in psychology, actually, I already had a master's in statistics. I was working as a statistician at the University of Vermont, and from my old statistical background, I recognize I don't have a random sample of people. Nobody has ever made an appointment with me just to tell me how well everything is going. So when it seems to me like, wow, gee, how come is it everybody who makes an appointment with me is having trouble? Well, that's why they're making an appointment with me. And so when I hear about polyamory in the context of my practice, it's because it's a shit show. It's not because it's going well. Something's gone wrong. Usually what's gone wrong in my experience is somebody agreed to it who didn't really want to. Like one partner proposes it. The other partner realizes, well, if I say no to this, I'm probably going to lose this partner.
Yeah.
So they'll grudgingly say yes, but they really don't like it, and then things go off.
Sure.
Things don't go well.
That's where the communication could be. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like I said, I as long as you're not, doing anything with kids or animals, I could care less what you do in your own home. Like, do whatever. Because I'm always, I've heard people say all kind of wild things, and I'm like, well, okay, that's not my thing, but what's it like? I guess it helps to have an open mind and just want to know about what else is going on in the world.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that we've also interviewed several folks on our podcast about this too, which is fantasy. A fantasy life is fascinating because so many people have very, very, shall we say, politically incorrect fantasies.
Sure.
And what's interesting about that is these are fantasies that, it turns them on to have the fantasies, but these are things that they would never actually want to have happen in real life.
Yeah.
But if you can not freak out at the fantasy, especially if your partner tells you they're having this bizarre fantasy or something, if you don't freak out about that, you can actually incorporate not the specific thing they're talking about. I forgot the proportion in some of the research. It was over half of women have reported having rape fantasies, which I've never met a single actual person who literally wanted to be raped. That's not the case.
I've met a couple.
But many people. Well, yeah, that could well be true. Actually, I'm not saying they don't exist.
No.
But the fantasy is very common, and it's because as one of the people we interviewed pointed out, when she's having that fantasy, it's not. It just so happens that the person who is taking her by force is doing exactly what she wants.
Right.
So it's the fantasy is that she's lost control, but of course it's her fantasy, so she can make it be whatever she wants. And what she wants happens to just be exactly, the person's doing exactly the sort of thing she likes done. Yeah. So it isn't anything like a real rape, but that is a very, it can be a disturbing fantasy for people who have it, or disturbing fantasy for people who hear it. And when people are able to hear that stuff without freaking out, they can discover that their sex lives and their intimate lives can get a lot richer just for allowing their minds to go where they go.
Yeah, and it may be just another way of them. It's an unorthodox way of them working out their own shit, their own trauma. Like it's like maybe that actually happened to them, and there's a part of them that was turned on by it, and they don't know why, and now they're kind of detached from like passionate sex, so they're trying to work their way back to that by doing something more aggressive and but for the right part, for the average person, most of us would be like, no, because I don't know you well enough that I'm not going to prison. And do we have a safe word? Or, again, like I said, that's for me, I don't judge, because someone who has mental health and who's had awful thoughts in my head of when I was at my worst and was suicidal, I saw people who had things I didn't have. And I'm like, I want to disrupt that because I don't have that. I would never act on it. But it was the idea, and that's what made me want to get medication, because it was like, I'm thinking about hurting people or whatever. And we all are trying to heal in our own way, and some people, their way is not as ethical as everyone else's, but the end goal is the same. and sex can
Oh
be
yeah, and
tricky.
the idea that fantasies are often about healing, a lot of people have noted that over the years. It's what's interesting about one of the people we interviewed was pointing out. I mean, yes, that is often true. The interesting thing is it isn't always true. In other words, you can say, well,
Right.
sometimes it's about healing, sometimes it's about exploring.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's just about going places you haven't gone because it feels like amazing to go there.
Yeah.
So, you know, but certainly, yeah, when you're talking about like serious mental health issues,
Yeah. Yeah.
indeed, that is often about dealing with past trauma, and the therapies of various kinds that help people are all about helping. Well, it's like I was saying earlier, they're all about helping it so that the being reminded of something that was traumatic itself isn't an emergency.
Yeah.
The event was bad, but the being reminded of it, to the extent your brain learns, oh, that's just a reminder, it's not actually happening. Your brain can then tell the difference between a memory and something actually happening, because the part of the brain that panics doesn't know that difference.
Right.
So you have to learn that by repetition, basically, the way you learn anything. You know.
And I would imagine
That's a
And I would imagine the women who are into like the rape fantasy, most of them, again, I don't have any statistics either, but I'm imagining most of them are doing their rape fantasies with someone they actually are compatible and they trust. Like, because, you know.
They're not necessarily enacting them. That's what I mean. They're not necessarily acting them out.
Yeah, I'm saying the ones who do.
The ones who do. Well, yeah, the kink world in general, and you mentioned that you talk about communication, you know, the folks who are into that in any sort of ethical way, they have a level of communication that most sort of vanilla straight folks don't come anywhere close to.
Right.
I see that all the time in my practice with folks. I had a session earlier today, actually, with a couple where a first session with a couple where they had not realized, she had been afraid to tell. It wasn't about fantasy stuff, but she had been afraid to tell her husband, and they'd been together, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, something like that. She'd been afraid to tell her husband that the sex they were having was really not only unpleasant, but it was painful. And, you know, she would do it because she knew he wanted it, and it wasn't satisfying for him either, because she seemed like she kept trying to hurry him up, you know, and she'd never she'd always been afraid to tell him, not because, you know, he's not a violent person, but she didn't want him to get upset, and she didn't want to get mad, and she'd just been afraid to tell. And they had this big blowout not that long ago, and that's what brought them to therapy, and that's when she was able to say what she needed to say, and it was hard for him to hear, but he was able to hear it.
Yeah. Well, see, that's why I like having these like open conversations, because it's like, I mean, I've had them about all kinds of things. I mean, I just interviewed somebody who's been in prison for 30 years. But I love just interviewing people and having real dialogue and not worried about offending people, because there's so much going on, and there's so many closed-minded people. It's like, you know, if you see a sticker on someone's car and you know who they vote for or whatever, you're like, you're probably not a person that's going to know half the things I'm talking about. And, you know, maybe I'm presuming, but go ahead. Sorry.
Well, that's, you know, I just did a Substack on this, actually. I just moved my newsletter to Substack, so I did one, and it's all about that phenomenon that, you know, it's like, yeah, you see a bumper sticker on somebody's car, and immediately you classify them.
Yeah.
And if you're on their side, you classify them as somebody who knows, and if you're on the other side, you classify them as they're either stupid, crazy, or evil. And it couldn't possibly be that there's nuances involved, you know, and I like to differentiate between ideas and ideologies. And what happens when you get people like we're having a conversation here, and my sense of this is we're throwing ideas around.
Yeah.
You know, I'm hearing what you're saying and you're hearing what I'm saying, and it feels good to me, you know?
Yeah.
If you get into a conversation with somebody where it's an ideological thing, there's no ideas happening anymore. There's just people defending their ideology.
Right.
And it gets you nowhere. And it's really difficult. And I've been recently gratuitously plugging a particular organization that I just joined recently, and I've heard of it years ago, actually, called Braver Angels. And what they are all about is getting people across the political spectrum to talk to each other.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, talk to each other respectfully, and, you know, not glossing over the differences. There are clear differences, but getting people to see each other as people who are talking about differences in policy aren't necessarily all that much difference in values, oddly enough. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
People can have passionate disagreements about whether something ought to be one way or another, and yet not be that far apart in terms of the end goal they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. No, because even being as a disability advocate and being in that movement, a lot of times I see people with disabilities go very hard at people who are, what we call able-bodied people. And I'm like, they're not all bad people. They're just some that created rules to benefit them. It's the same thing if you want to look at it from whoever is at the top of the pyramid in any country. I know white people get a big thing because it's like, oh, slavery and all that. But it's like whoever was at the top made all the rules for themselves. And they didn't feel like, bringing other people in. They didn't care. But as time goes on, we slowly are trying to turn those hands back and try to change and undo everything that has been done. And there are a lot of there's shitty people in every community, and there's great people in every community. And
absolutely,
you choose to be one, whatever. And when I was talking about like politically, I wasn't referring to either one, because I see people will say Biden's my president or Trump's my president, and I go, ugh, because it's like, why? Like, why do you need to? And again, maybe I'm presuming and whatnot, but there's a lot of people you interact with, and you're not going to have a conversation like this, because as soon as you land on a trigger word, and I don't even mean like a racial epithet or anything like that, just a word.
Right on.
And they lose and it's like they forget everything else you said before and after that. And
you're on the other side all of a sudden, and they just shut down.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And, why do people do that? They do it out of fear. And, why do people get into ideological binds? People get ideological because it reduces their anxiety.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, now I don't have to really think about the nuances. It's fascinating if you look at various kinds of debates, and one that comes to mind, I think, is a pretty easy one to give examples of, the abortion debate. If you look at the abortion debate, it is so easy for people on, I was going to say both sides, but actually there's multiple sides of that. It's so easy for people in any position on that, whatever policies you think ought to be in place, who can point to the other side and show the harm it does. Because any policy you come up with is probably going to help some people and harm some people.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's true in disability rights as well. There's all kinds of things that you can point to and say, well, this has unintended consequences that actually hurts people, whereas someone else would point to the same thing and say, are you kidding? This is absolutely essential. And it's things like that. Affirmative action is another great example of that. You can point to ways that it is obviously super important and does great good, and you can point to ways where it's obviously caused all kinds of harm and unintended consequences.
Sure.
And what do you do with the fact that real life is more complicated than any simple understanding of it?
Yeah.
And that's very difficult that's hard to tolerate, because it sort of leaves you feeling like, well, then we don't always have the answers. And, it turns out, yes, we don't always have the answers. We can just do the best we can. And when you get people in goodwill recognizing that, and see, that's the same thing that happens in couples therapy. When people can regain their sense of goodwill, even when they have serious differences, they have a shot at actually hearing each other. And when people are so convinced that, oh no, you're on the other side, you're closed-minded, or you're stupid, or you're deluded, or whatever it is that people call each other, they're not going to hear each other, and then of course they're not going to convince each other of anything either.
Right. There's too many people married to their own ideas and ideologies, and when that happens, it's
absolutely.
like there's really no moving them. And the older they are, the less likely it's going to happen.
Well, as an old guy myself, because I'm in my 70s, I like to think you're probably right. Frankly, I'm sorry to say you're probably right. The older they are, the less likely this happen. I also think there is something you get with age, at least as my experience of it, where I think I'm probably more nuanced in my understanding than I was when I was younger.
Sure. Yeah.
So because with experience you can develop some sense of perspective. I used to think I had all the answers, and now I realize I don't.
Right. Yeah.
When I was younger, I don't know. That's what.
No. Yeah, I appreciate it. No, because my grandma, I have a very good relationship with my 92-year-old grandma, and her ideology is a lot different from mine. The idea of going on social media and on podcasts talking about abuse and mental health and all these things, that you didn't do that in her time.
Oh no,
You
of course.
kept
There
it
was no
in.
way to do it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and you just kept it in, especially as a woman. Like she was there before
Hmm.
women could vote. And,
Wow. Yeah.
you just sit in the kitchen, you clean and take care of the man and the kids, and that's your job for life. But then she went through the hardships of when women could vote, and then it was just like, okay, vote, you're going to work, but it's going to be very trivial things. And then she became her own, and she had to be a woman who took care of my grandfather. He had MS, and he's, dead weight was 300 pounds, and she's maybe 110 tops. And she had to,
Wow.
now she had to not only, she had to take care of her kids, and then she had to take care of a grown man. And she just got stronger and stronger over the years, but she's very wise, but she also, there's a lot of things that she keeps in, and she doesn't talk about a lot of her regrets or, her woes and stresses, but you can tell it's in there. She doesn't like
Yeah.
to talk about it because that's just not what they did in her time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like to be like, I like to surround myself with so many different types of people, whether it's age wise or racial or whatever, because like when things happen in the world and I don't have that life experience, I don't have that perspective, I like to ask those people. So like I have friends who are Jewish, I have friends who are Palestinian. I like to have those conversations. Now, obviously, sometimes you get a skewed perspective because they may be too close to the situation to where it's like they only lean one side because of that's how they were brought up. But
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, and because of, it's understandable. I mean, it's, I don't think it's a bad thing even that people care more about their own group than they do about everybody else.
yeah, it's natural.
That's not toxic per se. That's like, well, yeah, you care about your family, and then you extend the family out to your particular ethnic group or whoever it is.
Yeah.
That's not surprising at all. And it's interesting. I saw a statistic a while ago that people who think of themselves as being part of a particular group, like Jews or Palestinians or whatever, people who have some loyalty to a particular group tend to be, and in the aggregate, those folks tend to be more charitable toward people in general than people who just say, no, I'm just a citizen of the world and I'm not, I don't have any loyalty to any one group. It's sort of interesting that way. Religious folks tend to be more charitable to non-religious people than non-religious people are.
Yeah,
which is kind of surprising.
It's funny, yeah.
And I'm talking about more charitable to people not of their religion.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like dedicated Christians or whatever. Pick your group. Like folks who are really, dedicated churchgoers and believers and all that, as a group, tend to be more charitable to outsiders than people who aren't affiliated or aren't particularly religious.
Yeah, I mean, my sister, I've talked about this side of the family, but she's Puerto Rican or half Puerto Rican, and I'm a white boy, and I grew up in Philadelphia, and I will say, like, when it comes to whether it's dating or just making friends, I would say I've been more accepted by other communities than white people. And I for whatever reason, I grew up in like a rednecky area, and that's never been my type of style. And again, I love anybody. I don't care if you're a good person, whatever. But I will say I've always done okay and I've had better relationships with other ethnic groups in most cases. I had plenty of great white people in my life, but because I think we always have this thing that's like, can't trust anybody who doesn't look like us. But in the reality of it is most of the people in your life that are going to hurt you are going to look like you. So
yeah, that tends to be the case because they're the closest ones to you.
Because they're the one, those are the ones that are around you the most, and it's whatever percentages. That's what happens. But yeah, I mean, and that's again, that's another perspective of having a disability and seeing what it's like to be discriminated against and being treated differently. And when you're young, you don't want to be treated differently because you stand out, you get bullied. But when you get older and you realize that you're different, and that's kind of what makes you beautiful, it's like, oh, okay, shit, like. This, like, I don't want to say I love having disabilities because, there's a lot of hardship with it, but I have no shame in being a part of this community because my disabilities have made me who I am.
Well, exactly. As you're saying, that's what I was mentioning earlier. I've heard from lots of folks who were disabled that sense of appreciation for who you are, and it's part of who you are. Why would you,
Yeah.
you benefited from being who you are because who you are is good.
And I nearly died, so I'm grateful to just be alive, even. And
Yeah.
when you see what life really, like how bad it can really get, you really appreciate little things. You appreciate a ceiling fan, or, appreciate a dishwasher,
Absolutely.
or whatever. Like, you appreciate all kind of things, because it's like, for last year, at one point I was having trouble urinating, and I had to have a catheter in for a couple of days. It sucked. And I appreciated my mobility. Like, when that thing came out of me, I was bouncing around, and I'm like, oh my God, like, there are people who have this in permanently. There are people who, whatever, like, they don't have a catheter in, but they can't walk at all. And I'm just limping and whatever. But I'm like, man, I really appreciate the fact that I can just stand. It's a small thing, but it's really not. And
Absolutely.
and
My son, who's he's going to be 40 actually in a few weeks, had a horrible accident last October where he was rock climbing, and it was a freak accident. It was ironically, it was a safety training he was doing, and a rock dislodged itself and hit him in the head, and he had a very severe brain injury.
Traumatic brain
injury. And he's been recovering. So yeah, TBI, a bad one, and he's been recovering he's still in a rehab facility. Wow. And it's amazing what kind of perspective, that has given the rest of us and his family. And it's amazing. He is recovering. He's recovered so much function that the doctors originally were thinking was very unlikely he would recover. But awesome. We are so grateful for everything, every little step forward. And it's, it takes something like that to recognize that kind of gratitude.
Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, I know a few of my friends who have traumatic brain injuries, and, it's, and they're all affected differently. Some are paralyzed on one side. Some, have trouble with their speech and their cognitive issues, and it covers the whole spectrum. So, but it shows you how freakish and like how quick life can change for you, for better or for worse.
Yeah. I know. Just a bizarre series of, a weird, just a freak accident in a place where that sort of thing does not usually happen, but it happened.
Yeah, and I think that's why I try to stress to people, don't detach yourself from, whatever, like the other side of society. Like, don't detach yourself from homeless people who are addicts or disabled or whatever, because you could easily be them, being the wrong person at the wrong time, or making a couple bad, choices in your life. They're not that far from you. Yes, there's some things that you're born with and all that, but, like, just because I have disabilities doesn't mean I'm impervious to the rest of them. I'm not. There are some that I am because I wasn't born with them. But in general, like, I want people to realize that, like, you're not that far off from any of these people. It's just they're down on their luck. They made a couple bad choices, or life is just kicking them around for whatever reason, but you can be them too. And it's be grateful that you may have a little dinky apartment, but you have a place. You're not living in a shelter. You're not living on the streets. You're not in prison. So be grateful, because, and again,
very
for me,
true.
Like I said, I have poor sight. I can see a little bit, and the sight that I have, I use it to every ability that I can use it for. But I know I could lose my sight. I know that's the alternative is I can have none. So I could be like, yeah, I could have more, sure. But when you constantly are comparing it to, like I said, did this a video earlier where I was like, we have to change our perspective, because we're always trying to figure out our growth, and like, oh, we haven't made it that far, because we're always comparing ourselves to people who have things that we want. But what about the people who would die to be in your spot? What about the people who look at what you have, regardless of what it is? Maybe it's just you have a smile and you have you have a clean pair of pants on, and they would do anything just to be in your tiny little apartment. They would do anything to have one friend or whatever.
And that's, I sort of fit what you're saying in the same bucket. I would call it faith. That's that sense of recognition, gratitude. It really goes along with that attitude that says, reality, it's hard sometimes, but we can appreciate what we have, and we can benefit from the struggles we go through.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, my friend. I really hope we can keep in touch. Sorry for being late.
No problem. And I appreciate the work you're doing, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Oh, where can they find your books?
Yeah, so best place to find anything about me if you go to brucechalmer.com. That's BruceChalmer, brucechalmer.com. That'll kind of link you to my practice, link you to my books. My books are available on Amazon. And my author name is Dr. Bruce Chalmer. You put the DR first, you'll get me. I don't think there's any other Bruce Chalmer writing anyway. And so they're available, anywhere books are sold, but Amazon's how people find out about it. So the more people buy it on Amazon, the more they tell about it. So that's why I sort of steer people there.
Sure.
So that's where people can find me.
Awesome, buddy. Well, I'll let you know when it's going to come out. Like I said, I really appreciate it. I hope you keep in touch. If you need anything, I'm around.
Well, thanks a lot. Much appreciated.
Yeah, buddy. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll talk soon, all right?
Very good. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right, buddy. See you. All right, guys. We are out of here. Sorry for the ESPN alert. I thought my phone was on mute, and of course it wasn't. Anywho, I was just about to get Bullet on the mic, but he just left. He was here the whole time and then left. For those of you who are new, Bullet is my cat. Anyway, I will see y'all next week. I'm going to keep this one short and just get out of here. But yeah, still keeping my head up high, keeping a smile on my face. I struggle every day, but you know what? Fuck it. We're still here, still alive and still kicking, and nothing's going to stop us. I'll see y'all next week, all right? Take care of yourselves. See you guys. Bye.